And it's good morning, good afternoon to the Sportsfan Radio panel and very special guest today, Grant Thomas. Grant, thanks for joining us once again. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure, guys. Happy to be here.
Now, Grant, you were good enough to be with us in October last year, and you were talking about St Kilda, and you said, as far as you were concerned, if they were to have a really good year this year, they'd finish 6th. If they were going to have a good year, it'd be 8th. And if it was an average year, they'd miss out. Well, history now tells us that they finished 10th, won 11, lost 11, only one game out of the finals. But as far as when I look at it, I think, in my opinion, absolutely a mile behind Geelong, Melbourne, Sydney, Collingwood, perhaps Freo. How did you see 2022?
Yeah, I think it was predictable, to be honest. I can't remember everything I said a year ago. Can't remember what I said a week ago. But look, if we played the interviewer from a year ago, I don't think it'll be that far off the mark because my view hasn't changed too much. So I just think we were probably pedestrian, average, showed some good signs here and there. Same old things. We were selfish. We didn't send messages to the club and the team about what we stand for, who we are, and we entertained those parts of selfishness, which I think came back and bit us a bit later. But we had some good spurts during the year, but too many bad spurts, and I think that led to the greatest concern was the massive fluctuation in our performances from an attitude and effort perspective. We were all over the shop. We were either very, very good or very, very bad. And that went from, week to week to quarter and contest to contest. Like, we're all over the shop. We didn't have a lot of consistency. So, summing it up, I think we probably ended up around where I'd expect we'd end up, 8th to 10th. But nothing really to write home about. I don't think we should be having grandiose ideas with the current culture, environment, playing list, leadership, and that we've got. I think we can only really perform to the approximate level that we're performing.
Judge, did you want to ask a couple of questions?
Grant, thanks for coming back on again, Grant. Look, the predictions you made last year, I just listened to the show before, and they're pretty much spot on. And you're right. If we didn't have any what you described as shock treatment, there really wouldn't be much of a change. Well, we didn't have shock treatment, and surprise, surprise, there hasn't been much of a change. As the professor said, if we'd made the finals, it would have been, knocked out in the first round. So things have pretty much stayed the same. I suspect you're a year older and a year more frustrated. What would be your view now about how we move forward? Because, for God's sake, we have to move forward.
Well, we just have to bring the shock treatment a year forward, I think. We only missed out by a game, but it's really 2 games when you consider the percentage, which was nearly 10% off, which was a problem. But, look, I don't think, I may have mentioned it before, but I don't think we're in the premiership business because we don't make premiership decisions. We don't, no one gets sucked along in our slipstream. We don't actually tangibly feel what St Kilda stands for and what we're about. It's sort of, it's not a very, very strong message. It's okay. Well, what are we going to get this week? Oh, we got a good quarter, or we got a good game, or oh no, we were terrible, or whatever. We're sort of all over the place. And I think I made mention last year with some of our decision making around, like Geary was the one I think I mentioned a year ago. It's just going to be interesting in the construct of the list this year and what they do, but it's not just about player personnel, because I think all players can perform much better with the right environment, the right leadership, and the right culture. So I think to that end, St Kilda's got some upside. I'm concerned that we still haven't got some of the key fundamentals required to go deep into September, but that's for another day, because you got to get your house in order, and getting your house in order means you got to get that leadership right, that culture right, that environment right, that club connection, player connection. All of those things have got to be completely in sync. And people always ask the question, "Oh, what's the most important thing? Is it the list manager? Is it the coach? Is it the CEO? Is it the board?" And you hear all the people calling in and making comments at dinner parties and stuff and say, "Oh, no, the list manager is the most important. Oh, the coach is the most important." It's all garbage. No one gets it. Everyone forgets to deal with number one, and number one is all about culture. Number one's about environment. Number one's about leadership. You got to get those things right, and then obviously in your selection of personnel, you've got to have as good a personnel as you can. But that doesn't mean, church mice, or it doesn't mean, everyone's, you haven't got any naughty boys in there. They're all challenges that get dragged along in the right leadership environment, or the right cultural environment. So those rough edges get shaved off, and you have St Kilda sort of asking the obvious question that I knew we'd ask. Oh, I don't know that our environment can deal with De Goey. De Goey just put a black line right through St Kilda to start with when he hears that. But they're the sort of things that concern me. I'd be focusing very heavily on those key fundamentals before I focused on things like list managers, coaches, and CEOs and boards.
Grant, there's a post-season review being conducted at St Kilda, and I know you're...
Sure, yeah.
So it's the committee is the president, Andrew Bassett, a board member, Jason Blake, who's been there, I think it's a year now. You've got the new CEO, Simon Lethlean, who you talked about last year, and then you've got David Noble doing this review. Now, what are they going to come back with? Because there's only one really external person there
Yeah, well, they're going to come back with whatever they want to come back with, the same as the internal review they did last year, Bassett and Lethlean did. They don't mark themselves very harshly at all. And number one is the transparency of the review. I always find that interesting, because we never get any information about it, and that's why you have an internal review, so you don't have to tell anyone else. If you're serious about who you are, where you are, and where you want to get to, you have an external review, and you make it very transparent to media, the club, fans, the whole lot. You live and die by that. But people are in protection mode. People are building moats of security around themselves with decisions they make. And when you have an ego-driven environment where self-sustainability is the key driver, you make all sorts of dumb decisions. AFL footy is very seducing, and when some people get in it, they just don't want to let go, and they will make any decision they can to stay there. That's not a premiership club. That's not a club that makes that's in the premiership business, because you've got to set aside all of your ego, set aside all of your personal circumstances, and think of the greater good. So the review, who knows what we won't get anything, because it's an internal review and they won't provide anything. They might give us one snippet just to make us feel as though we're involved, but I'm concerned about the internal component. I'm concerned about the lack of transparency. I'm very concerned about the people they've chosen to run it. When you consider that the president and the CEO are right at the forefront of all of the problems we have, and if they don't take responsibility for that, well, that's a bigger issue, and that's a bigger problem. I think Andrew Bassett will. I get a feeling his penny's dropping, because he's a half-smart guy. And I reckon, because of what we've said at the start of the year and what he refused to accept, and where he is now, I would be completely amazed if he didn't say, well, I've got to stop I've got to stop copping all the pee down my back now and thinking, being told it's raining. I've actually got to start to make some of my own assessments based on factual information, based on other stuff. Otherwise, I'm going to continue to look stupid because I think Andrew's been listening to the wrong people and the wrong information from the wrong people who are probably more interested in survival than anything else. So, they're big concerns for me. I mean, St Kilda Footy Club is approaching its 150th year and we've won one premiership by 1 point and we still don't realise that we don't do things right. That's a quandary.
And and the other thing, Grant, is that when you look at the list and you look at the changes, and we identified 2019 was an important year because they traded in and out and didn't have any first-round picks, and they brought in Hill, Ryder, Dougal Howard, Zach Jones and the like. But it's hard to see who's actually improved as a player on the list. So you might say like Jade Gresham, definitely Callum Wilkie, maybe Ryan Marshall, but he's injured. There's not this upward curve of players improving.
Yeah, because our young players, apart from one or two, aren't really up to scratch, and that's where you get the biggest magnitude of improvement. A lot of the other guys are towards the twilight end of their career, so you're not going to get a lot of upside with them. The guys in the middle, I don't think they're stars. I think they're good AFL players. But once again, I get back to the key fundamentals. Are you in the premiership business or are you not? Are you being driven by the right leadership? Do you have the right culture, the right environment? And the answers to all those has to be no. Otherwise, we wouldn't perform how we performed. I don't care about 11-11. I'd cop 11-11 if we went to the line from an attitude and effort point of view every game, but we just weren't good enough. I mean, I think we can all accept that. But what it comes down to is the manner in which we succumb and the manner in which we play. And, when I see some of the players play, I say, well, listen, I can't really go off at them too much because it's the same display you're getting from people off field, whether it be in the executive or the management. I mean, they're looking after themselves. So why should we're a club that looks after itself? We're a haven for anyone who can't make it anywhere else and wants to top up their superannuation or whatever. So we say, come on down, come on. The Saints is a great place to be. Well, when you've got all those things, it's a pretty sad state of affairs in that regard. But that's why then we need to have a really dramatic change of something. Something has to happen.
I was going to say, Grant, Paul Dalligan, I'm more rugby league, but I've taken interest in King's goal kicking struggles. Do you think that if he was kicking it like Stuart Lowe used to, you might have snuck into the 8, or is that a touch simplistic? There's obviously broader problems there.
Yes, look, it's a good question. You can always say the hypothetical and the would have, could haves and should haves and all of that, but pressure makes weakies out of all of us, and there's no doubt that he succumbed under pressure at a point in time, and then he's been able to handle on other occasions. But what I do know is if the old 6 Ps of training, perfect preparation, etc. When you're doing that monotonously, it's amazing how things come in line under pressure in a game. Now, from what I can see, he's actually either hasn't been taught or he's learning the wrong things because he's got a different run-up in distance, a different in tempo, different in arch, where sometimes he arches in, sometimes he wants to go straight. So it's all over the shop. So to me, he either isn't trained or developed, or he ignores everything once he gets into the game. So if he had have kicked straight, he would have had to have done a fair bit because we're so far behind in percentage, but as well. But I think all of those things, once again, Matthew Lloyd was contacted by King, a couple of years ago, which we remember that big story, and said he'd help, but he wanted him to check it with the club first. Checked it with the club wouldn't let him. Since then he's sort of defended the club and backed the club, and that's fine. But I haven't heard that before. I haven't heard a person that is a former AFL great that has had history with the player before you've got him to your club, and that player wants to use him and you've said no. Once again, that was just preciousness and trying to protect their own position and not being exposed if there had been a dramatic improvement in King's performance. So, and all of that is just, just linked all the way through, the way I see it, Paul.
It's surprising because we had a guy, Darryl Halligan, once. I think he was on the retainer at about 8 clubs. But if a goal kicker wanted some help, they were happy to call him in, and they all seemed to improve. And you could see it in their technique, you could see it in their consistency. And I'm stunned that they knocked that off the back. Yeah,
we all are.
Grant, I've got two major concerns. One's the board, and one's the what I call the football department. Simon Lethlean was brought in for a specific purpose from the AFL. And as I understand, it was because he knows the game, he knows the managers, he's an insider, if you like. Well, for a couple of years, he's clearly been after the CEO role. He's now got the CEO role. Matt Finnis will be gone. He's going to take over. I'm really concerned that Lethlean's gone beyond his skill set, and he's now going to be the CEO of the club and the football go-to guy. I mean, I just don't see his role, and just wonder how you see his role in the club going forward.
Yeah, look, I see it a little bit like, an old mate of mine, Brian Waldron, who was a tremendous football manager back when I started, and he was a fantastic support for us within football, very knowledgeable, had been around the game, knew a lot about it, and all of a sudden he got moved to CEO, and it all sort of went pear-shaped from there. And Brian had acknowledged that. And I see this as a similar situation. So I think you might be on the money with what you said, but Lethlean is a very, very career-minded person, and extremely interested in climbing that ladder. Proof will be in the pudding. I think he's got talent. He's got football intelligence. I don't know whether he's got the right attitude and personality and character. That's still in question for me. I just don't know enough about him. But with what I see, I've got question marks on all of those areas of leadership, of strategy, all of those things I just have some concerns about. So the proof will be in the pudding, but, we've definitely got to have a big shake-up off-field, and I don't see anyone that's strong enough to be able to deal with Lethlean, because he's been able to call his shots and convince people of a particular thing. We find ourselves in the position we're in mostly because of him, because he's been the big decision maker over the last four or so years, and now we're putting him in an elevated position. I think the board has either been intimidated by him and don't get the level of information they require, or if they are, they're only listening to his version of it, and because of that, I don't think we get the best outcome either. So I can't see a really strong person there that's going to be able to challenge him, keep him in line, and make sure he stays in his lane, because that's the most important thing.
Which brings me to the board. Just looking through the board, they've got a couple of ex-players. One of them's Anderson's been there for about 10 years, and I'd say he'd have to move on. I'd view the board position of more than 7 years, and you ought to get out. Anyway, he's been there for over 10. Blake has just come on board. Never the greatest of, I didn't think the football players or football minds, but that's the only personnel we've got on the board, and the rest is a smattering of all sorts of occupations other than football people. I don't see Andrew Bassett as being a football person, but the CEO role therefore takes on great prominence at St Kilda when you've got a so-called football person, Simon Lethlean, who's there. I see this as being a genuine negative for the club, because I think he'll exercise can I call it malign control over the board, whereby they just they're led by this guy because he's the football guy, and he doesn't seem to be that much good at it.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing in our defence, in the club's defence, and in our possible favour is I don't think Bassett will cop it for another year. I think he will say, hang on a minute, I've backed you and backed you and backed you, and look where we are. So if he chooses to back him again and not challenge him and not realign him, well, I would think that the both of them won't be there in a year, because I think we're going to get another poor performance. But you know, Andrew's a smart person, and I think that he will get the level of involvement he thinks is required to get the right outcome. And I just know now that he would have to know that we haven't got the right outcome. We're not on the right train at the moment. So something's got to change.
Andrew Bassett seems to me, Grant, to be the perfect person to conduct a review of the club. He knows, he's a smart guy. He knows business. He's used to big business. He would look at, as an outsider at the club, and say, bloody hell, this place needs, you know, the shock treatment that you're talking about. I actually think he's a wrong person as president, because now he's got to be a herder of cats, which you have to be, you know, when you're running a football club. It's entirely different mentality from what he's used to. But I think looking externally at the club, he would make the sort of changes that I just don't think he's capable of making, because he leads a board. He's got a very powerful CEO now, a supposed football person. And I just see this being tears before bedtime. I think it's going to all end up very badly in a couple of years.
Well, it won't in a couple of years, because I don't think there's enough sort of people out there that are agitated enough to act beforehand. So I think the next short-term period is important. Then clearly performance next year is important as well. I don't think people are going to put up with it for much longer. And, you know, we need to see tangible evidence of change. That's what we need to. And there's an opportunity, just because it's the end of the season, just because it's the players are away until November or October, whatever, doesn't mean we can't see some statements coming out. Doesn't mean we can't see some appointments. Doesn't mean to say we can't see some restructuring. Doesn't mean to say we can't see some actual tangible evidence of a review which shows the club and everyone else where they got it wrong and what they're going to do to mitigate that going forward. They're the sort of things you want to see.
Just a quick one, Grant. Why did Dean Kent play the last round?
It's just another typical St Kilda decision, just to, you know, emotional. Let's give him a 100th game. I mean, look, I think Rui, I was talking to Rui about a few things, and he mentioned to me that Matt Maguire and Aaron Hamill both played 99 games for St Kilda. I didn't know that, but
wow.
And he said they didn't get 100th. Well, I think they probably would have been a bit more entitled than Dean Kemp, with all due respect to Dean Kemp. Not Dean Kemp. Is that his name, Dean?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Dean,
Ex-Melbourne.
Yeah. Kent. I keep thinking of Dean Kemp from West Coast.
Oh.
I just thought it actually smacks of what our problem is. You know, we're not in the premiership business. You know, we, even for an isolated selection, we just weren't serious. We had kids we could have trialled in that game against a powerhouse club like Sydney. Yeah. There's so many things we could have done, but we opted for the emotional decision to give a guy his 100th game, that's classic St Kilda. I mean,
and it wasn't like, Grant, that Sandringham could make finals or anything like that. So you're playing Vital and a couple of the young kids in the reserves. And you're right. And the season before, we talked about the fact that Jack Loney kept getting games and he got dropped and then brought back in and stuff like that. Obviously, he's now off a list and playing amateurs. But yeah, you're right. Like, and this catchphrase at the moment in football about being ruthless, and we see it with Essendon. I don't know. Yeah.
Grant, do I get the feeling from what you're saying that because I just don't see change, and I think that Lee going to CEO, we're not going to see much change because the same people that have got us here are the same people who are supposedly going to lead us out of this problem. So I just don't see change, and I think you're the same. Do you see that there is a groundswell of peed off supporters, maybe some coterie groups, or I don't know. What do you see or hear out there?
Yeah, 100%.
Change.
100%. A lot of coterie groups are not happy, and a lot of them make contact with me, wanting me to do this and do that. But I had half a dozen meetings with Andrew Bassett last year, and that was to no avail. And I'll be getting on the front foot again with him soon, and just saying, okay, Andrew, where do you think everything is? What decisions you're going to make? Because if he thinks that he can promote Simon Lethlean to CEO, and then Simon Lethlean can put his two puppets in an elevated position to take care of his singular role of general manager football, and he gets Rath and his mate, what's his the list manager? I've forgotten his name now. Gallagher, who are now taking equal responsibility in that role with different portfolios. If that's not someone just looking after their own interests, I don't know what is. And we don't need the CEO focusing on the football. We need the CEO focusing on the business so that the football department can focus on what they need to do.
So assuming there is a revolution out there, Grant, what will it look like? And how do I get on board?
Well, hopefully it won't. It'll look a lot different. But I don't completely subscribe to your Andrew Bassett outcome. I mean, I think Andrew's a really smart guy. He's just misinformed, and you've got to back his loyalty and support for his people. But it ain't working. So he's been very naive. I would like to see Andrew Bassett stay. I think that he'd be fine to stay, but I'd love to have someone like a Fraser Garrick as director of football. Fraser's been very successful in his business since he's finished. He's one of the smartest football brains I've come across as a player. I'd love him to be involved. I'd love some of the other Saints, Luke Ball on the board, like highly intelligent guy, Luke, and a very, very smart person, and a good football person. He actually ran the leadership program at Essendon Football Club a few years ago, and got great upside from a lot of the players in that regard. So
it's one of the great frustrations and mysteries, Grant, that our champions don't go back to the club. They don't appear to be. They don't appear to be prominent.
No.
Whereas other clubs, they do.
Yeah, they do. And, North Melbourne do it very well how they've done it. And I'm not saying that we should just have former players on there, but CEOs these days, and this is the reason we're in a bit of a weird space with the boards, because boards originally came about because football clubs, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, couldn't afford specialist information, whether it be legal, accounting, finance, whatever. So the easiest way to do it, 50, 60, 80 years ago, well, you're a Mad Saints person and you're a lawyer, so can you come on our board? And you're an accountant, you come on our board. You're a CFO or a great finance, but you come on our board. You're fantastic at networking, you come on our board. And you put a board together which were effectively highly talented people that could either mentor or provide advice or open doors for your business. That's sort of what it was, and make some decisions on the way through, obviously. Whereas now we're at a stage where CEOs are paid $750,000, some more, and you want them to run the business, and you don't necessarily need that. So I think boards should be more heavily weighted towards football people, and if you need legal advice, you employ legal advice. You need specialist advice. You employ that and pay for that. and don't have the situation on the board, because the attitudes of board members, in my experience, have been nothing more than people that are happy to be there in a lot of cases. This is a generalisation, but I've seen it far too often. All they're interested in is getting Nick Greenwald to come round to their kid's 10th birthday and kick a footy with them. Like some of the things that we went through in my day, it'd make your skin crawl if I was happy to tell you about it. But I think the whole dynamic of boards needs to change. But at St Kilda, I'd be happy for Andrew Bassett to say and put his hands up and say, listen, we need help. Listen, we're not on the right track. Listen, I don't think I'm getting the right information. Listen, I don't think we've got someone strong enough to look after left lean. And then I'd get your Fraser Garrick, your Luke Balls, and I haven't even asked these guys or spoken to them, but I will. If we get the right people in that environment, well, then we can say, okay, we're starting to get that right leadership, that right culture, that right environment in the right spot. And I think that'll be a good start.
Grant, my solution, which I put to these guys previously, is that the company should become a public company, get our 60,000 members to buy $1,000 share. $60 million will get rid of that bloody debt, and we'll start to move forward. I know, Paul, your team got some success from going through private ownership, and surprised to me that I think half of the NRL clubs, Paul, are in private ownership.
It's worked very well. I think we talked about it last time on the show that you need a reason for players to want to be there. So even an Eric Bunner-driven type momentum about the place, but it's working very well. I mean, Rabbitoh's dressing room now, you got the Atlassian bloke there, worth a squillion, walking around. So for a blue-collar club, we've got some money behind us, and there's certainly the resources there to propel the club. But it's a club now that players want to be at. And that's what St Kilda has to be when someone's weighing up their future. Do they want to be at a club with a bit of buzz about the place? The best analogy, though, I think, was the Cowboys for St Kilda. Cowboys were tipped by many, myself included, to come near last. They had a lot of old blokes, a lot of young guys unproven, and yet now they're sitting up there high and mighty. So it is possible with the right change there for St Kilda to do a Cowboys, if we use that phrase.
Grant, if you had St Kilda's got some very wealthy supporters, some very high-profile supporters. You get something with $100,000, you got 100 shares, they've got some skin in the game. Suddenly they think a bit differently about the club, because I don't think if we had major shareholders, we'd put up with this crap for much longer.
Judge, how many times can you go to the same? But how many times can you go to the same supporters and ask them to put their hands out?
Once you buy the shares, you've got them. You've only do it once.
Yeah.
But
the only concern I have with that is our track record, and our track record in the AFL has been abysmal. Probably the worst in the competition. We've won one premiership by 1 point, and we're the longest drought in the club's history, in the AFL's history. That's not a really strong baseline to invest and go public, because if we became incorporated in that regard, I'd have grave concerns that we'd be right out the back door very quickly. St Kilda has to show some evidence that it can handle those things and do those things. We've had many individual superstars on the ground, some off the ground, and a lot of very wealthy people that have been backing us for a long, long time, and it hasn't really helped and assisted. I don't think just the private ownership thing changes, albeit I'm an advocate for private ownership of AFL clubs, but I don't think it's ready for it just yet.
Grant, our 150th year, as you've pointed out, next year. I think we're the most unsuccessful sporting club just about in the world. We're certainly only AFL. I mean, one premiership at 150 years is just unacceptable. Can you see that as being a springboard? As I don't see much coming from the club celebrating the fact that we're 150 years next year, but could you see that as being a springboard for some of these coterie groups or others to say, come on, guys, things have to change?
Yeah, I think there's going to be a fair bit of movement leading into that. But how much and what effect that is going to have, well, that remains to be seen. You know, I'm like you guys, a crazy, passionate Saints fan, and that's it. I don't want to be on the board. I don't want to be on a director. I don't want to be in the footy club, or I don't want to be coaching or any of that sort of stuff. But so it makes it a bit difficult if you're not going to get your hands dirty in that regard. But I'm very definitely keen to ensure that the right decisions are being made, the right accountabilities have been managed, and that the right people in the right places. And I'm happy to provide advice and guidance and mentoring or anything else. But you know, and so to that end, I'll be banging away on in my own way, but I know that there's a lot of other factions that are doing similar things. The people aren't happy, and nor should they be. And I know the club's not happy either, nor should it be. But we need to see, well, okay, what are you doing? And it's got to be better than, we're doing a review. Reviews are sometimes well placed just to tell everyone to go away for a while. So, you know.
Grant, I know that the judge is going to ask it, but we're currently talking about AFL media rights and all that, and Gill's legacy. Who replaces Gill?
Well, I think we should be advertising nationally or globally.
Yep.
And I wouldn't care if a Susie Arden type person became CEO of the AFL. If there was an outstanding person from the UK, fantastic. If there was a great leader, female leader up in Western Australia, fantastic. So I don't really care. I just want to make sure we're going outside some of the names that I've currently heard. If we're going to be serious, I just think we've got to be serious about that appointment and that whole process. I don't think it should be this hand-me-down thing, and I don't think it should be, you know, this manically controlled sort of process. I just think we're probably the biggest sport. Paul, I don't know whether we knock off the NRL or.
Well, I was going to say, if you want a man named Peter Volandis, he might be running out of ideas for rugby league. But yeah, seems like a bull in a china shop if you want that approach.
Yeah. Well, we had that with the last peanut before Gill, but
similar heritage.
I think I just think we should go through a really good process. It's a very privileged position, and it should warrant that.
Grant, and aligned to that, Tasmania, what's going to happen there? What do you think should happen there?
Well, it should just go ahead, from pure and simple. I mean, the competition will be better with Tasmania in the competition. It would then put more pressure on the 10 Victorian clubs to deliver and do whatever they need to do. And if one of them eventually drops out, well, so be it. And you know, and I'd hate it to be St Kilda, but you know, if it is, well, we deserve it, you know. So I think Tasmania has earned the right. I think they've provided an incredible amount of some of the greatest AFL players of all time. In my travels, I haven't seen a more passionate state than Tasmania. They are absolutely loopy about their footy. They love it. They're great people, great produce, great upside down there, great visiting destination. I just, you know, if the only thing we're weighing up is a stadium, I'm sure there's ways by involving, you know, other institutions down there to come together, whether it be hospitals and government or whatever, and actually build the infrastructure together, so that, you know, nothing wrong with having a hospital, you know, around half of the ground. I mean, there's lots of different things that can be done to achieve that. And once that happens, I just think it'd be fantastic to have a team.
We had a stadium expert on a few weeks ago, Grants, and let's just say the stadium issue is problematic. And put it as simple as that. I suspect from what you're saying that you think a 19th team should come into the league, being homegrown Tasmanian team, not a
Yes.
transplant from somewhere else.
Yeah, I'm not so much in favour of the 19th team. It's more I just think Tasmania should have a team. Yeah.
All right, Grant. Look, we really appreciate you coming on and talking about St Kilda.
Always a pleasure.
Yeah, and I guess we could say that what we should be looking for is change, because if we see some change, then there might be some change on field as well.
Yeah, that's what we're hoping for and looking for, and watch this space.
All right, thanks very much, Grant. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Grant.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Grant. It would be interesting with Grant, like he puts his hand up to be involved in the club, and if he gets knocked back again, and the reasons why he gets knocked back. I would think, and you raised it before, Judge, is that and Grant listed some ex-players. I think one of the things that happened with Melbourne was that when they started getting some of the ex-players that they'd exiled out of the club back involved, so like your Brad Greens and then Steins came in, and Rod Grinter's running the coterie group, which got a lot of good Melbourne people back to the club who probably felt they'd been kicked to the gutter.
Adamuze as well.
Yeah, Adamuze, but you let people like James McDonald and Cam Bruce and these players are giving the club great service, and he sort of crapped on them a little bit, and not being soft or anything like that, but it just didn't create good culture. Anyway, we'll see what happens.
No, I'm completely with that, and it's one of those phrases I used to hate, but I'm into it now, called buy in, and you just need the players buying in, and we saw it when New South Wales finally broke their state of origin drought, as they were buying in with Freddie Fittler. He'd been there before, and that you need that buy-in, and I think you're more likely to get it from someone who's come through that system and achieved or performed well, and someone you look up to, than an unknown.
Kuda, that post-season review terrifies me.
Yeah,
as to who's doing it. So that is not a review. And what also terrifies me is the football guy has now become the CEO guy. It's just got mud written all over it, as far as I can see.
Well, Judge, it's a lot like what I call a lot of Zoom meetings. They're shuffling deck chairs on the Titanic.
Yeah.
Well, John, if ever you don't have to go past the last well-publicised internal review, and that was the Essendon Football Club during this season.
That go well.
Yeah, well, and now they've got, not only did that not go well, it's now an external review. So I think, yes, it's a watch this space.
Went about as well as Ivan Milat's defence.
Hey.
All right, enough on the Saints. It's a watch this space. Paul, NRL round 24, there was plenty to like about that, and it started off on Thursday night with a bit of a surprise. People probably thought that maybe the Eels would be better than the Broncos, but 53-6, that's a shellacking at home.
Well, it's a shame that Sportsfan Stan's not around, because he could get the red pen out and put it through a surprising team, the Broncos. So you can cross them off as gone. Unbelievably so, because I don't think it's happened before. A team in the top four only a few weeks ago, they will not make the 8. You've heard it here first. So I did say a couple of weeks back that the Raiders were gone, and that prompted Ricky Stewart's, partly prompted his outburst. But the Raiders are going to come in like a steam train into 8th spot. So the Broncos have turned it up, along with a few other teams that we'll get to, Professor. So there's a lot of more blokes turning it up than at a poker game at the moment in the NRL. They just seem to be already having their mind in Bali, some of these blokes.
So, Paul, what happens to a team that's in the top 4, and then last week they lose to the Storm at home 60-12, and then, as I said, 53-6 to the Eels on Thursday night? What happens to a team that they suddenly disintegrate like that?
Something's just happened there, and they've just, the momentum has completely gone against them, and they've just been dismantled. The problem with NRL and the way it's been set up this day is to be so fast and to speed up the game. When a team's on top, they can really do a number on an opponent. So it is unfortunate, because I always used to say there's only a couple of teams that can't win the comp, but we're starting to almost get back to the haves and have-nots now, which is surprising, because the Broncos were being talked up as the success story of the year, but that's now going to be much further north, well further north to the North Queensland Cowboys as being that team. But they're showing some signs now of not keeping up with the powerhouses.
They were plus 75 in points differential before they played the Storm, Paul, and now they're minus 26, and that minus 26 is going to be, as you said, see them gone, because although they've got the Dragons this week, and let's face it, the Broncos form, who knows whether they can beat the Dragons or not, but if they do, they've got to make up at least 43 points on the Raiders.
Now, they're gone, and that's because of that points differential. And the Dragons today, I'll say it in advance, they'll do a number on the West Tigers. Ben Hunt might as well have his CV out there today instead of the football, because he's been underplayed, undervalued by his club, and he's got about 6 clubs circling him. And even our man Wayne Bennett up there at the Redcliffe might be watching that space with Ben Hunt. So the Dragons, they'll dismantle the Tigers, so you can forget about the Broncos' points differential. They are gone, and it's one of the biggest collapses I've seen in rugby league.
All right, Paul, Friday night, I had the pleasure of watching the Storm and the Roosters, and I watched it with Schooner, and we both said that that's the best game of rugby league we've seen outside State of Origin in the home and away for years. It was played with the intensity of a final. It had everything. It had biffo. It had a send-off. It had the bunker chiming in on whether there were tries or not. Like it was on edge until the final whistle. So if ever you wanted a great advertisement for rugby league, by crikey, that was a game and a half.
Well, you enjoyed it more than poor old Victor Radley. He didn't see too much of the game because he was knocked into Disneyland. So I think when they said, "What's your name?" he said Mickey Mouse, because that's how big a hit it was. And it shows you how tough it was. And there was some unsavoury moments in that game, but it does show the intensity that was there. Given that both of those two teams will finish top 4, there's a big chance they'll be playing each other. And the Roosters' form, as a Rabbitohs fan, it's starting to scare me a bit, because they really, really have some momentum on their side. But as you've said, that is all class on show there. Cameron Munster, he's the hottest player in the game. I haven't seen this much talk about a player in 10 years in terms of where his future is. The Storm have managed to find $1 million somehow, all above board for him. But you've got Wayne Bennett out there pushing $1.5 million a year. I was very interested, and I'm supportive of Wayne Bennett's comment about all the criticism aimed at him for poaching players. He pretty much said, what am I supposed to do? I have to put a team out there. People want us to be successful, but how am I supposed to get players without annoying people? No one's going to want to let their stars go. So he has to be poaching. It's not doing anything outside the rules. The players are free to talk from November 1, and he'll be ready with his checkbook. I am supportive of that. As much as the Storm might not like it, as he may have previously made comments he doesn't plan to raid certain teams, well, circumstances have changed, and he's got to put a team on the park. And there's quite a few marquee players that he's keeping his eye on. Munster's one. You've got Mitchell Moses, Dylan Brown at the Eels, both off contract end of next year. And you've got Ben Hunt there as well, a Queenslander who would be a perfect fit at that Redcliffe team in order to mould the older guys that are coming in, the Dad's Army forwards from the Storm, forgive me, and also the younger guns they've got there. Ben Hunt, I think, would be perfect there. I'm just wondering about Munster, if he went for the money, whether that would be the best for his football. And I think Munster's looking good because he's surrounded by a great Storm team. He's a freak of a player, but I just don't know if Munster would be as effective at that Redcliffe new team.
Paul, going back a step, Victor Radley can't play this week, surely.
No.
Surely he can't play this week. Now, the other thing, Judge, and this is something that NRL, so they've got 4 on the bench, and then they've got a 18th player, I think it is then, yeah, who can only come on if you've lost all 4 players. Is that right, Paul?
The medical sub, yeah.
So if you lose, so the Broncos on Thursday night were down to 1 player on the bench, and I think they ended with none at the end, Paul. I think it was right at the last moment. Whereas the AFL has this medical sub that you can use for cramp. you can use for anything. And yet here we are, the NRL is sport that has more concussions than what we do. They run at each other, high impact, high collision, and they have a rule that you can't replace, or you can't have this medical sub until you've got 4 players that can't come back on. Now, for me, the medical sub was brought in for one reason, that was for concussion. Yeah. And then the coaches have had their way and said, well, hang on, it's a medical sub, so we can use it for whatever we want. So the other thing with the NRL, obviously, is they have the head injury assessment. Now, Paul, I don't know when you watch it and you're watching the trainer who does the concussion test on the ground, who makes him stand on one foot and balance and all that sort of stuff. The rugby league has to have a look at the concussion and the whole HIA stuff, I think, going forward. I think we've discussed it previously on the show. But Radley, if he plays this week, what a horrible look that is for the game.
When I saw him at the end talking to players, I thought it must be a doppelganger. There's no way that he's out there talking because he was gone for all money. So he can't play in that. I agree with you. It's a bit farcical what they have the trainer out there, almost like the American driving test, you know, by the side of the road, touch your nose, count to 10, and tell me the capital of Alabama, you know. It's a bit like that. But they do have an independent doctor who watches the footage. And if someone's staggering around like they've had 20 pots, the word will come through that old mate's got to go off and be checked by the proper doctor as opposed to the bloke with the water bottle.
Yeah, I think there was one the other week that there was a concern the other week. I can't remember which game it was, but it was 4 or 5 minutes. So the independent medical doctor who sits in the bunker, it was 4 or 5 minutes afterwards. And yet the TV had actually shown the collision and the bloke stagger.
Well, there's been times when I put that photo up and we got in trouble, those drunk Russian men after too much vodka. There's been blokes looking in more trouble than that, and they've stayed out there. So it is a bit inconsistent the way they're applying it.
Kuda, the AFL situation is a disgrace. Let me just say that. And it's just another example of the way the coaches just rule the game and change the rules to suit them. Paul, but another thing that's raised by Kuda's question is the interchange. How does interchange work in the NRL in terms of how many interchanges would you have in a normal game?
I'd have to come back with you on figures on that, but they've certainly changed the numbers down to make it tougher, and it is becoming more survival of the fittest in terms of the numbers there with the 4 players, the amount of times you can bring them on and off. So it is promoting a lot more of players having to stay out there longer, which I think has increased the concussion, because a lot of concussions are when a player's tired and they're making these mistakes when they're almost out on their feet. And that's how a lot of these dangerous things happen. So there needs to be a better balance.
My impression is it's nowhere near the AFL, which is...
No, Judge, it's the interchange, I think it's 8. It was 10. I think they brought it down to 8. And then what they do is they have a HAI blood bin.
Yeah. It's nowhere near the AFL.
No, not even close. And so what they can do is they can get a free interchange if someone's got to go for the head injury assessment or they've got blood, whatever it is. So, ours is what? Ours is 75 or something like that.
I just think it's ridiculous.
I'm interested. It's very related to what Professor was saying, the standard of that game he watched. I think in terms of putting on a performance and a brutal contest, they've certainly achieved that through minimising the interchange. But that has come at the cost of these players are at the edge of the physical capacity. And that's why the games are so tough, and that's why the skills are there. But you're really at that level of pushing these players, my word, to their ultimate limit. And they used to say State of Origin was 30% more intense than a club game, but that's not the case anymore. The club game standard is so good and it's so tough that these players are right at their limit.
To me, it should be reversal. Logically, it should be reversal. You'd think it'd have more interchanges in the NRL because the danger factor is 5 times higher.
So what Paul referred to before with the tiredness and the fatigue of players is when they start hanging arms out to tackle. Yeah. And so they don't actually tackle with their bodies. And so I think the other night, Paul, I think there was a couple late in the game where there was some high tackles just because they couldn't tackle correctly. The other thing I think when they say they sped the game up is it's there's a few things. It's the play of the ball. it's the 6 again. So the 6 again's been tweaked this year.
Yeah.
And it's like football a bit, John, where the ball's in continuous play.
Yeah.
And so there's no sort of breaks. There's no sort of rests that the players have got, which they've probably had previously, Paul, you'd say?
No, that's right. And I've got to say as well, I saw both teams at the airport the other week. I saw the Swans and I saw the Titans. And just in terms of physical specimens, and I'm not in any way criticising AFL, but I do know who I prefer to be hit by 20, 30, 40 times a game. The rugby league physiques are just massive units, and the Swans obviously athletes, but just in terms of the physicality, I can only imagine being hit once by one of these guys, let alone 20, 30 times at full speed. I mean, they are massive units, and the physicality of this game it's absolutely extraordinary with rugby league.
Combined with the fact, there's more players in the AFL, and the ground's a lot bigger, and it's a 360-degree game. So I just think the interchange numbers should be reversed.
And one thing we haven't talked about, Judge, and we're not going to today, but the proposal by Hare Maguire about having, or the introduction of 4 field umpires, 4 goal umpires. No idea where they're coming from. We're going to rob grassroots footy and community footy. But, Paul, who can win the NRL competition this year? I know that Cleary's going to come back.
Yep.
The Panthers are going okay at the moment. I don't think they're humming as what they were previously. The Storm the other night probably had chances to win it. I think, Professor, they had a couple of tries disallowed. And then there was a couple of Tedesco brilliant moments. So you're going to get those. You've got the Bunnies, good win last night against the Cowboys.
Yep.
And then you've got obviously the Roosters. So is it going to come from those 4? And I don't think Parramatta can.
What about the Sharks?
Who?
I was just about to say, I actually think the Sharks will make the grand final. I think they're playing some amazing football. I think there might be a surprise in that first week of 4. And the Sharks, and if you win that first week of 4, the same as AFL, it's just such an advantage. The Panthers are every chance of being knocked off in that first week of the finals on the basis that Cleary will just be returning then. So I think the Storm can do it. It's a shame. They need Pappenhausen at full strength, but that's not going to happen. That would have been having their odds of $6 much shorter. The Sharks are $7, and I think that's the value bet. And the Roosters as well at $8 dangerous. I'd rule out Parramatta North Queensland. I just don't think they've quite got it. Rabbitoh's not quite there, and the Raiders, the ultimate dark horse, who'd been written off. There's no team more dangerous than a team like a wild card in baseball, as we often talk about. The Raiders are going to be that wild card with nothing to lose. But I wouldn't be getting a super out on Penrith at $2.25, even as good as they are, particularly given that Cleary issue. But if they can play it smart and have that O'Sullivan, who's stepped in amazingly well on the bench as an X factor, much like Benji Marshall was last year, taking the Rabbitohs to the grand final, they could bolt away with it. They're almost like the $1.80 horse, the Panthers, $2.20 horse that could win it by 8 lengths hard held. But there are also some other teams, if they click. Very interesting fact as well. Someone went and crunched the numbers. I think it's our man Joel Kane at one of the betting agencies. The teams actually have played Panthers in the last 8 finals have scored more tries than the Panthers. So the Panthers might be the classic case of the great team, but other teams lift for finals times, and the Panthers are at a standard which can't get much higher. So the other teams, if they match the Panthers on any given day, they're no certainties. So,
Paul, leading into finals next week, before we go to air again, as one of our former panellists, Mark Fiorini, would say, mouth-watering ties. You've got, on the Thursday night, Eels playing the Storm, 5th versus 4th. On the Friday night, you've got the Roosters and the Rabbitohs, 6th versus 7th. And then you've got the Cowboys against the Panthers 3rd versus 1st. So that's a really great round to lead into finals.
It is. I think the Roosters and South, so in terms of importance, not as important now that the Rabbitohs have qualified for the finals. There was a chance the Roosters could have knocked out the Rabbitohs, but the Storm, they have to win to be top 4. We know how important that is. So that is going to be a cracking match, the Storm and the Eels. because to finish top four, it would certainly propel the Storm deep into the final. So I think the Storm will win that match, but we'll see what happens with the other. But the top eight's pretty much locked in with the Raiders, I think, at home into that 8th spot.
Okay, and for those who have the punt on today's games, the Wests and the Dragons, final score?
Well, I think the Dragons could do a number on the Tigers, despite the Tigers trying to rebuild, adding Benji Marshall, and in the market, they even had a crack at Munster, I think. So, yeah, we'll see how that goes. I think he gave it some consideration, about 2 seconds. And then we've also got the Titans and the Knights, 2 of the worst teams of the year. So that's not one that'll put bums on seats, Professor, unlike the match you watched. So I think the Dragons will do a number on the Tigers. I think 42-10, they could even smash them today.
And the Knights and Titans?
Well, I'd roll the dice stuff, that one. I think the Titans should win at home, maybe 26-22, but they've got nothing to lose. They're just paying for contracts, some of those guys. The defence won't be great, but you might see some great plays attacking-wise.
All right, gentlemen. Well, been a loaded program today, and I've got Gelding's away in Bali, but I've got his tips text to me. So, Moe, heavy 9 the track, race 2, horse 6 Triotto, race 3, horse 3 Tycoon Commander, and race 6, horse 9 Jungle Sensation. So there we are. There's something to finish the weekend on.
I was going to say, I hope he gets out of Bali before the rugby league players arrive. He'll need his jockey's whip to keep him away.
All right, gentlemen, thanks very much, and look forward to doing it all again next Sunday.
Have a great week.
Cheers.
Yeah.